إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us, يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. You who believe, be mindful of Allah as is His due, and make sure you devote yourselves to Him to your dying moment. And Allah reminds us, يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. People, be mindful of your Lord who created you from a single soul, and from it created its mate, and from the pair of them spread countless men and women far and wide. Be mindful of Allah, in whose name you make requests of one another. Beware of severing the ties of kinship. Allah is always watching over you. And Allah reminds us, يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. Believers, be mindful of Allah, speak in a direct fashion and to good purpose, and He will put your deeds right for you and forgive you your sins. Whoever obeys Allah and His Messenger will truly achieve a great triumph. Today I would like to narrate to you a short conversation between a sheikh and his sheikha. A sheikh and his sheikh. And this sheikh is a very well-known sheikh. For those of you who are familiar with shuyukh, you will recognize him. But his sheikha is not very well known. His sheikha is not very well known. And I want to narrate this conversation with you to help us understand something that has gone wrong with the ummah. And so I will address that point first before I narrate to you the story. The issue that is a very difficult issue for us to understand, first the broader issue, and that issue is that the ummah has become separated from sound, authentic, and authoritative knowledge. And that's a result of the innumerable number of seminaries of our schools that produce these ulama, these scholars, over our history. These seminaries have become, in many cases, like in Egypt and in the Middle East, they have become nationalized, and their independence is lost. Okay? Azhar, the greatest Sunni institution, was nationalized in the early 50s and through the 60s, and so it has lost its capacity to remain independent, and that affects the way in which fatwa emerge from the institutions. And when a scholar loses his or her independence, then his or her ability to speak truth becomes a distraction, becomes limited. And so this is a challenge. And then as a result of this, and as a result of defunding these seminaries, these institutions which flourished for hundreds of years, the knowledge of the public, has also decreased. Right? So you've got this phenomena that has occurred over the last 200 plus years in the Muslim Ummah. And so we find ourselves with tons of problems, of course, because we don't have the knowledge of our deen, the authoritative, authentic knowledge of our deen amongst the people. That has reduced. This is a well-known problem. It's not something that I'm telling you that you are unaware of. What I want to underscore, however, is an aspect of this problem, and that is that in the history, up until about the 1200s, okay, up until the 1200s, you had a situation Okay, and this is in the first, you know, 6th or 7th centuries of Muslim experience and Muslim civilization. You had a situation where there were hundreds of women who were scholars. There were hundreds of women, thousands of women who were scholars. Sheikh Muhammad Akram al-Nadwi, who is a sheikh from the Darul Nadwa al-Ulama from India, and which is a very famous seminary, which still retains its independence, interestingly enough. It's still independent and funded by the public. He is a graduate of that school and has studied in under many different scholars all over the Muslim world, and he now teaches in Oxford University in one of his own institutes that is affiliated with Oxford University. And he has done research for a number of years in which he has published a huge volume of the muhaddithat, the women who were experts in hadith, okay, who narrated hadith from the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And he writes biographical accounts of 8,000 muhaddithat and scholars, women scholars. So there was a time in the Ummah where women were empowered and they were key scholars in the tradition. In fact, you have names such as al-Fadl bint Harith, Maymuna bin Sa'd, Amra bint Abd al-Rahman bin Zarara al-Ansariya, Nadba Mawlat Maymuna, Fatima al-Kuthaiya, Hind bint al-Harith al-Farisiyya, and innumerable other names. I can assure you none of these names are familiar to you, right? None of the names are familiar to me until I began to study this with my scholars, the scholars that I've studied. And this is the sad part, that there were hundreds of women who were involved in scholarship. In fact, through the 9th Hijri, right? In fact, if you think about Ahmad ibn Hanbal, or al-Shafi'i, or Abu Hanifa, or Imam Malik, all of them had a number of women who taught them. All of them had a number of women who taught them. And if you think about one little city called Fustat, which became Cairo, right? You had the granddaughter of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Sayyida Nafisa, right? Who taught in Qahira. Who did she teach? She taught Imam al-Shafi'i. And she taught Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And she taught the students of Imam Abu Hanifa, and Imam Malik, and Imam al-Laythi. Right? This was the state of affairs. And what has happened since then is that post the 9th century Hijri, so for the first 900 to 1,000 years, you had a large number, never an equal number, but a large number of women who were part of the scholarly class. And then that thing tanked. And there are a number of reasons why that number tanked. Okay? The number in general of scholars has tanked as well, but the number of women scholars has tanked in a much higher rate of decline. Now, why is this of importance to us? Why am I talking to you about this? Why is this important? Muslims are dying left, right, and center. Why don't we talk about that? Well, this subject is important because if the trend is going to reverse, there are things that each one of you has to do. Each one of you who is blessed with a daughter has to do a number of things differently in order to encourage your daughters to become the ulama, the sheikha of the future. And why is this important? Why is it important to talk about this subject and say that we need women to become scholars and not just men to become scholars? So ostensibly the Quran is the Quran, the Hadith is the Hadith. If you have an intelligent brain, and no scholar can be a scholar without a sharp, intelligent brain, a rational brain that knows how to analyze, that knows how to understand the Arabic in a fluent and a deep way, and then deal with the text of the Quran. Right? This is a given. So if a man has it, why do you need a woman? Of course, the reverse question is, a woman has it, why do you need a man? The truth is, you need men and women both, looking at the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the guidance, given to us by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The character of the ashab of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and analyzing it and thinking about it and thinking about how to apply all of that thing in our current context. You need both the perspective and the voice and the insight of the man as well as of the woman. Because Allah has made it very clear that the responsibility of understanding is on all of us. And if 50% of our community is disengaged and their voice is not part of the dialogue and the discourse, then we suffer. This is a given. This is an absolute given. Notwithstanding the prejudices some of us might have against women scholars. And I'm not suggesting any one of us here does. But the point is that we have not recognized this big hole that has become part of the ummah. And so I told you at the beginning that I want to narrate this conversation between a sheikh and his sheikh. And there's a reason for that. Right? And I'll tell you the names of both of them at the end of the khutbah, inshallah. So this sheikh, he is a hugely accomplished sheikh. He has studied both in the West and the East. He has studied with innumerable classically trained scholars in Egypt, in Sham, in Syria, in Saudi, all over the Muslim world. He also is a highly trained and accomplished legal scholar of the American Constitution. He has practiced American human rights law, corporate law, a number of other law in the American context. And of course, he now is a professor, a renowned professor in the University of California in Berkeley. Okay, again, some of you may have recognized him already, but I will share with you his name later. But this alim, this scholar, about a decade ago, decided to visit Cairo. He's from Egypt himself. And he decided to visit Cairo, and he decided to visit some of his mashayikh, okay? Including this one woman that he really admired, this sheikha, that he really admired, and he looked for her, and he found the masjid that she used to teach at, and he went to visit her, and he didn't find her there. And so he asked around, and he was told that she now only teaches at her home. So he went to visit her home. And he describes how he climbed these narrow steps, went all the way upstairs, and then he entered her home, which was, the doors were open, and she was holding a study circle, al-halaqa, with her students. And he respectfully sat down and he heard her, and he didn't interrupt her. And she saw him, and she gave him a smile. And then when the halaqa finished, he approached her and he talked to her. And he described to her the challenges he has faced in teaching Islam to Muslims in America. Right? So he learned from her and many other scholars, and then of course he's been settled here for the past 25 years, and he's been teaching. And he shared as a student might with your favorite teacher, or a teacher that you love and respect, and what will you do? You will complain. Right? And this sheikh writes about the fact that he complained to his teacher, about the pain he has experienced in trying to teach. And so he tells her, Ya sheikha, I was once arbitrating in a case in which a woman, so because remember he's a lawyer, he's an American trained lawyer, and so he has the legal training not just in Sharia but in American law, and to merge it when Muslims encounter problems with each other, especially marital issues or business issues, and he adjudicates and he arbitrates. So he was arbitrating this case where a woman had left her marital home. She had left her husband, and she had moved out of her husband's house and gone back to her family's house. And because her complaint was because he mistreated her. The husband of this woman mistreated her, so she left the house. And her complaint was that he would yell at her, he would call her names, he would abandon her, leave her for long hours. He would rarely take her out. He was abusive to her. And the husband complained to the imam of the local masjid. And the imam said, Wallahi, akhi, your wife is wrong, because she owes you obedience and ta'ah. Obedience. Of course, the wife didn't agreed, and she didn't return. So this case came to this sheikh of whom I'm narrating, and who is narrating this story. And the sheikh looked at the matter, and he arbitrated, and he said, the woman has the right, this is the judgment he gave, the woman has the right to leave her husband's home until the husband changes. And she doesn't have to return to her husband's home until her husband changes his behavior. So when the imam, who had given a different opinion, heard of this, and the imam is not as well trained, clearly that's why they went to an arbitrator who is more qualified. When the imam heard this, he cursed the scholar. He cursed the scholar. And he asked him, where do you get this opinion from? So this sheikh that I'm mentioning, he told him that in the Fatawa al-Hamidiyya and in the Tahdhib, both sources clearly state that a woman may leave her husband's house without the cause of it being at the level of su' al-mu'ashara. What is that? Without the case being at the level of physical abuse. That a woman may leave her husband's house if there is emotional abuse. That it doesn't have to rise to the level of physical abuse and danger before she decides to leave. That this is well established in books that are about 1,000 years old, with the ulama saying, yes, the woman has the right to leave her husband's home if she is being emotionally abused. So the imam hears this and he says, show me. And this sheikh brings him to text. And he reads those texts for about 30 seconds, he looks at them, and he says, this is all nonsense. And he throws the books aside. Now, the sheikh narrates this to his sheikha. And what do you think is the sheikha's response? She's never been to America, by the way. So she says, my young sheikh, yes, many jurists have held this position, and of course, all the sources you cite, and all the jurists who wrote these sources lived long before America ever existed, and at a time when Europe lived in the Dark Ages. Right? This is his sheikha assuring him that on the merits of the case, his adjudication, his opinion, his fatwa was the more reasonable one. Right? And then she said, so what did he say when you showed him the books? And he said, the imam dared to call me a liar, so I went and got the relevant books and showed him, and his response amazed me. He said, I know about these books, but it is all wrong. Much of what is found in these books is wrong. Now, let me comment on this attitude, okay, of this person who's not as well educated. This is part of the Ummah's problem, that we have lost respect for deep knowledge of this tradition, and that we are divorced from it. And so, when there is a person who has deep knowledge, we can't recognize him or her. Right? This is our problem. That when deep knowledge comes to us, we look at it and we say, oh, this is irrelevant, throw it aside. Because we have lost the capacity to actually recognize deep knowledge. Because we have lost that capacity that tells us that I'm learning. Who is your sheikh? If I asked you, who did you learn from? You would be able to tell me if there was a true sequence of learning that I learned from this person, who learned from this person, who learned from this person, who learned from this person, and you would connect all the way back. And this is part of the sanctity of knowledge that is handed down, that is firm, that is sound, okay, and that doesn't waver and shake. This is what the Ummah has lost. And so, when this sheikh, he's hurt, and he's with his sheikh, he's with his teacher. So when you're with your teacher, who you're so comfortable with, he will narrate these things, he will say these things, right? And she assures him, and she says, Subhanallah, and she reads this ayah. She says, قُلْ هَلْ يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ إِنَّمَا يَتَذَكَّرُ أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ. Say, are those who are knowledgeable like those who are ignorant? It is only people of sound reason who will know. And being Egyptian, before she says this ayah, she does this, right? Egyptian women are famous for putting their hands like this before expressing something that is discomforting. I narrate this story to you because it is illustrative of what happens. It is illustrative of what happens when the voice of women scholars is reduced in the Ummah. The presence of women scholars is reduced. So I ask you to deeply think about what it is that you as individuals, fathers and brothers and grandfathers and sons, you as men in this community, what can we do to encourage more of our daughters and the women of our community to become scholars? This is a huge challenge. You won't do, there will be no results tomorrow. There will be no results next Friday. Not a week from tomorrow. Not a year from today. It's a long effort. The men should make sure and ensure that we encourage our daughters to pursue becoming a scholar of the deen, of the Sharia, and restore the balance that has been lost in the Ummah. And it will address the first problem as well that I mentioned, which is that we have reduced and we have separated ourselves from the ulama of our time and of the past. We have to restore this, restore the place and the strength and the support of our ulama, and when that happens, our condition is going to improve. It will improve. Can you imagine if every masjid in the United States had a qualified scholar, sheikh or sheikh, maybe both? How will that change our communities' capacity to live their Islam properly? It will explode it. It will. And this is what we, all of us, we're not scholars. We're not scholars. But we have the capacity to understand. This is, Allah has given every one of you the capacity to understand this deen. To understand even the most complex of issues that the ulama struggle with. But once they've struggled and figured it out, you who are not scholars, me who's not a scholar, has the capacity. This, Allah assures us of it. I may not be able to create that wonderful fatwa and that wonderful extraction of Allah's intent and His purpose, His illah, but once it is extracted, I absolutely have, and you absolutely have, the capacity to understand it. And so we need to support this. And I invite you to deeply think about what you as an individual, who you might think you have no real role to play, but you absolutely do. Right? We are all capable of playing this role. What can you do to encourage, especially if you are fathers and daughters, encourage your daughter to become an alim, a really trained woman scholar that will benefit the ummah. أقول قولي هذا. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. The name of the Sheikh is Dr. Khalid Abu al-Fadl. Some of you will recognize him. If you don't, Google him. He has dozens and dozens of books. Read some of those books and be enlightened. And his Sheikha, who is not known to anyone, her name, Allah yarhamah, who has passed away, Umar Zainab al-Laythi. So my request is, again, narrating this conversation between the Sheikh and his Sheikha, is to recognize the immense contribution that historically women have made to establishing this deen, and that we as individuals and as communities make choices. If you encourage your daughter to become an alim, if you who is the head of a masjid who makes a decision to invest in a minara or a salary for a scholar, let's weigh it. Which one do you want to invest in? a minara, a beautiful minara, a Khutbah, or do you want to invest in a scholar who will change the lives of your children and your lives? The Prophet never built a minara. He barely made a roof over the Masjid al-Nabawi. But he built men and women, right? And he transformed them. He transformed some of the most egregious behavior and some of the best behavior. Some of the worst kind of behaviors that a human being could express, these same individuals were transformed into those who conquered the world. That's the ability to change. And ulama can do that. Your buildings won't do it. Your buildings won't. The chandelier won't. The beautiful carpet won't. Make it nice and convenient, but it won't change your characters. But the alim will, and the halima will. So we need to really set our priorities. The Shaykha, Umar Zainab al-Laysi, in the same conversation, she reminded Khalid Abu al-Fadl. She said, you know, Sayyidina Aisha, she taught Sharia to 232 men and 67 women. Salama, another wife of the Prophet ﷺ, she taught 78 men and 23 women. Hafsa radiallahu anha, she taught 17 men and 3 women. Asma bint Abu Bakr, the older sister of Aisha, she taught 19 men and 2 women. Asma bint Umays, she taught 11 men and 2 women. Ramla bint Abi Sufyan, she taught 18 men and 2 women. This is our history. This is our history, right? But now our history is sort of nowhere. But the truth of the matter is, because you are going to make that choice, and you are going to make that choice, and all of the sisters are going to make that choice, and all of the brothers are going to make that choice, we'll transform this. But you have to first accept this responsibility and then act in the ways that will transform this and change the condition of the ummah. So I invite you to think about this request. It's not a request for tomorrow's solution. It's a request for a generational solution. Consider inspiring, encouraging, and supporting your daughters to become the ulama of this deen, of this sharia. Inna Allaha wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabi. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim fil alamin innaka hamidun majid. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. عباد الله، إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. واقم الصلاة.